Welcome to this week's episode of the Safety Brief. Today I'm joined by Mike and Matt for an insightful discussion on incident response and management because it's not if, but when and how you respond. However, I'd like to take a moment to applaud Mike for his dedication to spreading cybersecurity awareness. Despite his busy schedule at Las Vegas Kaseya Connect IT event, he made time to share his knowledge with us today, truly upholding our mission to spread awareness. Thank you both for your time.
Yeah, we got job security, if anything, and cybersecurity. That's the truth. So no, happy to discuss this, and I think it's a good topic. I think everybody listening is going to enjoy it, both live and catching the recording via Spotify and the other streams and audios we have. So Elizabeth, thank you for making it available virtually anywhere. Anyone with any type of device with a power button can get to it. So there's a lot of work that goes into that.
Of course, happy to do it. So let's kick this off by explaining what exactly an incident response plan is. An incident response plan is a documented, systematic approach to addressing and managing the aftermath of a security breach or cyber attack. Unfortunately, these things do happen. So this will outline the steps an organization must take to detect, respond, to recover from security incidents effectively, if and when they do happen. Now that I've kind of explained what an IR plan is, can you share what the key components for an effective incident response plan might be?
Let's simplify that first. We have the grand definition of what an incident response plan is. In layman's terms, it's what you do when everything goes wrong. I mean, we'll just be completely honest there. An incident response plan is something that you hope you will never have to use, but it's going to be there for when the worst of the worst possibly happens. And being able to keep a cool head while leveraging it is going to be invaluable.
Yeah, you think an incident response, and I think boiling it down for everybody that's listening is, we have insurance. We hope we never have to claim, but we have insurance. We have a fire drill. We have an active shooter response plan. We have all of tornado drills. We have all these things that we've either grown up with or had to adopt in our adult life. But they are plans for when really if something like that goes wrong. It doesn't mean that thing's going to happen. It doesn't mean it's inevitable, but it does mean that there is a level of responsibility to be prepared for that. You know what I mean? And so no different than a parent with a young child creating a will. It's just a matter of, hey, I want those that come after me or those involved in this situation to be better prepared for it, when it comes to pass. And so I think it's very much a future looking, future oriented plan. It's not something that you're maybe going to immediately reap the benefit of, and that's okay, right? But I think it's a very much saving up food for winter type of approach. It's very proactive. It's very good for security teams to do when they have some prevention centric controls already deployed. You make sure that you don't leave the front door unlocked and then try to figure out what happens when somebody breaks in your house, right? Like, let's get locks on the doors and windows. Let's get the security systems deployed with prevention first, and then in order of operations, I think having an incident response plan, even if it's something as simple as a matrix communication. Communication matrix of saying who is responsible for making these decisions at this time. There are some important components of that. But I think just starting off, order of operations, be sure that you have your front lines covered down on with some managed prevention before you start planning proactively for a future potential event, right? Like the here and now is real. And so make sure you cover down on that before doing your future planning.
Of course, yeah, the prevention in place is definitely needed, and can stop these plans from even needing to be put in place. However, it is important to have in place. So just to recap a little bit, a couple bullet points that would make a good incident response plan would be a clear, defined role for what people would be doing in those situations, incident detection and reporting procedures for when it does happen, response procedures, communication and coordination, recovery and restoration processes. And then, of course, last but not least, your documentation and post-analysis, post-event analysis. It's important to know what happened and why, and how you can prevent this from happening again in the future. So there are many types of attacks. So how should organizations prepare for different types of incidents? Because there's so many different levels of attacks that could occur.
Yeah, great question, Elizabeth. So the preparation phase is really making sure that, number one, you acknowledge the relevancy of these type of attacks. We've looked at social engineering taking a lot of users, a lot of title companies with all the home buying that's been going on in the past 18 months. You're just acknowledging, hey, here's where my attack surface is, and here's what the likelihood is of me going through something like this. It's no different than if you live in South Florida and you're calculating flood, hurricane, and storm insurance versus you live in Chicago. And you got to look at basement flooding insurance, right? There's no basements in Florida. It's not as relevant. So, you got to take inventory of what your risk is first and foremost. So do you have users out of the office with devices that they take home? Do devices all remain in the office? That is going to directly translate to what type of incident response plan you need and what compensating controls you need, right? And so I think taking inventory is part one. Part two is also making sure that you divvy up the responsibilities. It can't all go to one person, right? And you look at from a business continuity aspect of it. We'll go back to the will example, not to be doom and gloom, but my will has controls in place if I pass, but also if both my wife and I pass, right? And there's got to be some level of redundancy there, that it doesn't all go to one person, or in the event of an incident, what happens if they're on PTO? Happens if they're no longer with the company? What happens if they're sick? And so those are real things, or they're unavailable due to whatever outage or whatever internet outage they're experiencing maybe. And so make sure to divvy up those controls, and many hands make light work in an incident response plan. So typically you want a point of contact for legal. Typically you want a point of contact with marketing, public affairs, press, right? Who do we need to contact? Who do we need to notify? Things of that nature. What timelines these things need to happen in, what order, things of that nature are also important. But you really just truly make sure that in an incident response plan, obviously it's a luxury if you're listening to this and you're a 3 to 4 person shop or a 3 to 4 person team supporting an enterprise. Maybe it is one person, right? And that's an ideal. I'm not saying that it's a need, but more so just things to think about of, hey, if somebody's unavailable, we want to make sure that this control or this action item is taken care of. Other things to consider, for sure.
You also need to make sure that you're following some form of a RACI chart for all of this. Because if you're going to have all of these different segments that are out there with responsibilities, there has to be communication. Everybody's not on an island. You need people that are going to be responsible for set objects. You need people that are accountable for set objects. You need people that are consulted for objects and informed for objects. Note that some of these do not involve people actually doing anything except listening. That's a big thing. Listening. When you're dealing with an incident response plan, not everyone needs to be taking action. If everybody takes action, it gets more chaotic than it really needs to be. Somebody's going to do something they don't need to do. That's a bad thing. Then you end up putting everybody back to ground zero because you have to figure out what, Steve from accounting did that, just set everybody back. Thanks, Steve. So having a RACI chart in place, it's something for everyday, actions at an office place when you're doing, communication between groups. But when it comes to something critical, you need to have that outlined and it needs to be adhered to. Yes, there can be contingencies. You could have backups in place. If somebody's not available because, say, they are traveling, somebody needs to be in place to make a decision in their stead. So that means you need somebody that you can trust, that's going to have the right head on their shoulders, that knows the direction you're going. But having that in place, that helps with everything that Mike is saying. It'll help keep everything just flowing smoothly. You're going to have the accountability aspect. Plus, and you should be doing this, you should be doing some kind of a root cause or something where it's documented every step that you are taking during this IR. And I only say that because if, say this was a ransomware incident, internally, you're not going to be the only ones looking at this. There's going to be other entities that are looking at it, and you're going to need to have details to show them where you did not screw up. And that's going to be a big thing.
Yeah, Matt, well said. So really, another thing to think about is different types of incidents. If you're listening to this and you've been in an IT supporting role or a director role or anything like that for a while, you know about the difference between disaster recovery, business continuity, and things of that nature, and then a cyber attack. So certainly there's overlap in the scope of, okay, like for example, when I was in Chicago, we would often do DR BCP plans for companies. We would simulate what does it look like if Chicago gets 12 feet of snow, something crazy. Users can't get to the physical office. How do we simulate that? Well, this was all pre-COVID. Everybody stayed home, and then we found out what couldn't they do, what couldn't they work on, right? That's business continuity. How do you keep business running in the instance of you can't access a certain part of your business, whether it be a server, whether it be the physical office space, things of that nature. Because of that, the organization pivoted to all laptops that the users would bring back and forth. If they needed it at home, they had it. When they brought it to work, hooked it up to a docking station. That was their business continuity plan, right? They had the same workstation, the same assets, and obviously there were certain compensating controls from a security standpoint, like VPN and making sure they're behind a virtual firewall when they got home that they didn't need to do in the office. So there was exercises. And so different types of incidents absolutely include varying forms of downtime. It could be a physical inconvenience that you can't get to the office. It could be that the server is encrypted and that's where those files were used to live. And so if you think about these different scenarios, of course, again, it has to be unique to your location and your business. If you're preparing for a hurricane and you're in Arizona, you're prepared, but you're not equipped for a relevant problem, and so I just think that kind of analogy applies to people because incident response plan is very vague. It's a very broad thing. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So first and foremost, take inventory of where your crown jewels of your environment live, wherever, like what your business can't operate without. Now you know what would be targeted by threat actors to be useful to them to try and get. So now you start building compensating controls and business continuity around that. Right. And so that comes in the form of, as a file share. If you have a physical server with physical files on it or a virtual server with files on it, where are those files backed up? How else could you access those files? There's the data integrity piece, meaning we can't let anybody that's not authorized access these files. That's part one. But there's also the availability piece in the CIA triad of, well, if you can't get to them, that's even worse because now I can't do business. And so just things to think about. And those that aren't familiar, definitely refer to the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, things of that nature. If you start thinking about those things as you develop an incident response plan, maybe, just maybe, it makes it a little bit more clear of where you need to prioritize efforts.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Trying to see what you're vulnerable to and what makes sense for you to have planned, which is why doing a risk assessment or, scans can also be helpful in these cases. That way you can base your plans off of those results. Another thing we also hound on a lot on the safety brief and just Blockworks in general is end user education. So this is an important one. What role does training play in incident response and management? It's a big one.
A lot.
Yeah.
Very, very big.
Definitely big. And this is just, I speak up on this because, in the Marine Corps, we talk about, train like you fight. Train like you fight. So whatever you're going to need in a real-time scenario, that's how you should train. And so it's important that, number one, you have relevant training that is just high quality. It's similar to what kind of kits and attacks that users are going to see. So when you're using user awareness training, make sure that very good targeted phishing kits and attacks and simulated are included in that. That's what users are seeing a ton of. One thing that we've seen as an emerging capability of some more next gen platforms is text message simulation, email simulation to their personal email, right? Like how else? Because if you see somebody on LinkedIn and you know their business email, there's other ways through social media, through open source intelligence that you can get their personal email, right? And so it doesn't always have to go through the company email. It could hit their personal email somewhere, somehow. Things of that nature. And so training definitely comes into play, but make sure that the training is to a quality and a relevancy. Again, it comes back to relevance that is applicable to what your organization may be at risk to. And so I don't say that every organization doesn't have the same risk, but there are certain phishing kits that threat actors will use that are more targeted to their audience. So I was doing phishing training for one organization that was primarily responsible for wealth management. So they were based out of Texas. So we did a phishing kit where we sent their users a American Express overage charge fee email, basically something that said you have surpassed your available credit limit, and now you need to pay these fees or whatever. The wild part was we sent this to their work email. None of them thought for a moment that, wait a second, yes, I may have American Express, but that would go to my personal email, not my work email. Why would I? And maybe it was a business card, but you'd be surprised. Saturday night, 10 p.m., people are just looking at it on their phone. They maybe had a drink in them, maybe out and about. They're not in front of their laptop. They're not seeing the full email in front of them on a big screen. It's just on their phone, and crazy open rate. And so make sure that the training, what you're providing for the users, are think like a bad guy. Right. Don't just think as if, well, we did training and now they're equipped, but you got to be crafty. You got to think like the enemy sometimes.
Oh, there's an easier way to do that. And it's more fun. Way more fun. What you're saying about thinking like the bad guy, yes. 100% do that. Love it. I live that every day. It's great. The better option, or augmentation, I should say, gamification. I don't care who you are. When you are trying to learn something, if it is put into a game form, I am going to excel at it and I'm going to try to get the high score. So if you can make a game out of it, tabletop exercises, doing any kinds of things you can that brings people together in a fun environment for the same goal of understanding and implementing the incident response plan. And knowing how everything happens. I mean, I don't care. You could sit there with a D20 with a dungeon master for all I care. Make a D&D campaign out of your incident response plan. If you make it fun and engaging, people are going to actually retain it. I can't tell you. Okay, and I'll just throw this out there. This is nothing against any of the things they make you take, like the harassment training. I don't retain any of that. Okay, I love that they make us take it, but quite honestly, it's common sense. Like, if you're not a bad human, you don't have to worry about failing what they're sending you. This is different. Incident response, good humans fail at all the time. And it's not because they're not good humans. It's because it's not clear cut. There's so many moving pieces that you have to have and have to have an understanding of, have to have people overseeing. You make it awesome. Make your CISO be the dungeon master. That's the best option. Your CISO is the dungeon master, and the people that are, on top of each of your departments, they're the ones building their characters and having their character sheets and running through this exercise. Because at the end of the day, it's all going back to the CISO anyways. They're going to be the one that's on the chopping block if something goes wrong with the incident response plan. We've said it many times before. When an incident occurs, the CISO is usually the one that's going to get blamed for it. There's going to be a fall guy. There's going to be a scapegoat. It doesn't matter. Somebody's going to have to take the hit. It's going to be a resume generating event. So make sure that if something happens, you're not the one that's having to deal with the resume generating event. Have that in place so you can say, look, my little questing party, we're good. We've got this. We've got this. We've got the confused bard over there. Don't know what he's doing, But when we ask him for his part of the role, he's got it down. And for some reason, our mage keeps trying to cast Fireball point blank.
That's right.
You know what? We're still
That's
good.
right.
The pieces
If you
are all
know,
there.
you know. If you know, you know, right?
Exactly.
But I think specifically something Matt pointed out that's important is that there's many hands that each have very specific roles and responsibilities in the scope of the incident response plan, and they know their role. If somebody walked up to them and said, "Hey, what would happen if this happened?" They know, okay, yep, I know. And it's almost like a rehearsed play in that way, right? As long as you know your lines, you don't have to know everybody's lines. That's not the goal, right? The goal is that you know your parts to play, when you got to be on stage, when you got to get off a stage and just get out of the way. Because anybody been to a high school play or a college play and somebody stays on, they're like, this guy's not supposed to be here. What's he doing? It's just
making sure your understudy knows where
That's
things are in case you get hit by a bus.
That's right.
That's
right.
why we were saying have somebody that's a backup.
Yep.
If you get hit by a bus and you're in the hospital, there's minimal chance you're going to be participating in that incident response type activity.
Right.
And if you are, kudos to you. But seriously, you should take some downtime. You get hit by a bus. Get better.
Right.
So.
And then the other component to that too is making sure it's documented and people know where that document lives. A really relevant example that we can give today. That's it's a scientific poll. It's not with real people and real events, but if you have a file or a document that you're working on that is only accessible to you as the incident responder, that doesn't serve anybody any good in the event that somebody else needs to access it, right? And so specifically making sure if you've done all this work already to compile this plan, make sure that it's redundantly backed up. It's on the file share. It's where people know. It's just something if anybody out of the office asks, hey, where is that thing? People know where to go get it, right? And so super relevant, but again, common sense, just making sure it's available.
No, I love that. When you think of, incident response plans, even if it's going to like a fire, how to escape, at a building, there's flyers everywhere or like plaques showing you where to go and how to get there. I think having the availability is very important. And Matt, I love the creativity there. I will say gaming does make it a lot easier. Just like when I was learning cybersecurity, I did a lot of over the wire and try hack me and so on and so forth. So the game idea is genius. I love that. So to move on to the next question, what are some common challenges organizations face when responding to incidents, and how can they be overcome?
Just a lack of unification. The second an incident happens, everybody goes into CYA mode. Well, it wasn't us. It had to be them. Well, it wasn't us. It was them. You get the Spider-Man meme. Everybody's pointing at each other. When an incident occurs, the last thing you want is everybody to be on their own island, trying to say whose fault it wasn't. Guys, it happened. Deal with it. Come together and get through it. It's the biggest thing. You'll never find a larger ego than when something goes wrong, because everybody wants to prove that it wasn't them, it was somebody else, because they're afraid. They're afraid that there's going to be ramifications for what happened. And if they can't prove it wasn't them, they could be on the chopping block. Now, mind you, that's not necessarily something new. This has been long-standing, and it comes from management. It's a failure in management. Management is the one that sets up these divisive situations where if something goes wrong, somebody has to be at fault. You know what would really help? Good management. Management that understands that nothing is going to be perfect all the time. Management that understands something happened. How can we get through it together? You're going to find that people are going to rally when they're not scared. And that's usually what happens. You go through, a month or so of everybody being terrified as hell. And then they wake up and realize, oh, we still got an incident we have to get through. And then they come together, they get through it, and then everybody goes back to being terrified. Take the terror out of it. Yeah, something happened. Get past it. Learn and grow. How do we do this so that we don't have this next time? That's what you want to take away. Those are the takeaways you want, not Oh, well, it wasn't this group. This group did great. Oh, this group, they kind of sucked a little bit. They weren't as good as they could have been. No. Great. Take this group that's awesome over here. Have them work with this group over here. What worked for them that made them successful? What could they implement? Lift people up. Don't break them down. Never works.
That's a good word. For those listening, either live now or reading or catching the recording, if you've ever read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, there's a concept in that book called no bad teams, just bad leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it unpacks how, there's a relevant example, but they go into a story about SEAL teams and buds and going through training, and there being boat leaders. And I'm probably not doing the story justice, but there's boat leaders. And if one boat was underperforming, they would keep the entire crew intact. They would just change the boat leader and they would see how the boat does. And It was crazy how one boat that was failing behind, not keeping up, not doing their stuff on the speed and the reps that they needed to, all of a sudden just turns it around. So it wasn't the caliber of the talent on the boat, it was who was leading it. And so I think when we come to an incident response plan and management, this comes down to, number one, measuring risk. Number two, delegating these tasks out. We have quarterly rocks internally that they're big, monumental company strategic moves, but the rock owner, the person doing it up in the EOS framework, isn't the one doing everything. There needs to be a leader. There needs to be some delegation there. And so it goes back to making sure you have many hands to do light work. If you don't have many hands, that's fine. You can still break down those steps into measurable bite-sized pieces. And so it's all about just making it one step at a time, right? And merely, do we have monitoring? Do we have a contact on our team that's dedicated to this cause? Things of that nature are important. But when you think of challenges, it's honestly, number one, I think it's either too many things fall to one person than is realistic. And number two, it's not repped out enough. It's not simulated enough, meaning you walk through the book, you get people around a physical table and you walk through this process, this document that you're creating or created, and you get many eyes on it. You ask for feedback. And if it's more work, great. It's more preparation now and less hectic, crazy, reactive emotional response later. And so, but again, training kicks in when a firefight happens. Training kicks in. When crap hits the fan and things start going sideways, that's in your life, that's in your professional life, that's in your personal life. Ultimately, how you deal with stress on a day-to-day basis is going to determine how you deal with it when something bigger happens. And so just being good at stress management, making sure that you're taking time out of your day to check in with your team, take inventory of stress levels. If the most stressed person on your team is the first person that comes to mind for creating an incident response plan, maybe you need to take something off their plate so they can make a good incident response plan, not just a plan, and so just take inventory on the effort that's needed and, just some of those challenges, right?
I love that the culture came up once again. It comes up in a lot of our conversations, and we are all about the culture here at Blockworks. So how does incident response tie into broader safety culture within an organization?
Well, the long and short of that is they're kind of interconnected. So if you have proper safety controls in place, there's going to be less of a chance you need an incident response plan to be actually used. You need to have one. Okay? I'm not saying you don't need one. You need one. Everybody should have an incident response plan. An incident response plan is not just for corporations. Personally, you should have an incident response plan. If something happens, you need to have a plan for how you are going to tackle it. You may not need to rehearse it, but you need to have one. So when you look at security, you have all kinds of different controls that are in place. There should be an incident response plan for those controls. If this falls, then do this. If this falls, do this. If multiple fall, there needs to be a plan to prioritize which one is going to be the priority. They're both going to be important. One is going to have to take precedence over the other. Otherwise, you're fighting a war on multiple fronts. That's going to take more resources. It's going to burn people out. It's just going to be terrible. So having everything in place, having solid security, having the understanding, the knowledge, the training, all of that going in together ties directly in with that incident response plan. It makes it easier to implement because you're going to know where your weak points are that need shoring up. That incident response plan is basically you're driving around the dam and you see a big crack. You're not going to put resources over where there's not a big crack. The incident response is going to be when this crack decides to turn into a hole, here's how we are going to attack it. That's what you have. That's how it all ties together.
Yeah, I'd concur with that. I think ultimately, again, when it comes back to it, there's a level of forward thinking, there's a level of anticipating the future that comes with incident response, but it's simpler than a lot of people think. There's a lot of entities out there that are dedicated to building an incident response plan for, not for you, but with you. You know, there's a lot of legality in if they build it for you. And so there's people that'll build it with you. There's also templates online. Even if you go to, you know, you just do a quick Google search and you just like sample incident response plan. Start with something. It's easier than starting with nothing. And so get out there. I know there's a lot of free resources. And the neat thing about the cybersecurity community, before we wrap up, I know is just the communal willing to give back to the community. I think the cybersecurity community has a camaraderie baked within its genes that is just unlike a lot of other industries in a way. Surely there's competition. Surely there's, we want to be better. We want to grow. We want to invent and innovate. But I do believe that at the core of every cybersecurity practitioner, we see so many community-driven events, whether they're CTFs, whether they're resources that are put on. You know, one resource that we have is the 21 Blocks, and that's available to anybody listening to this or watching it live. If you go to blockworks.com, blockworks.com/21 blocks, 21 BLOKS. So the neat thing with that, the 21 Blocks document, is it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap to prevention. It's a roadmap that basically maps out what would you need in a prevention-centric stack. And if you're looking at an incident response plan, there are relevant pieces in that roadmap to say, hey, remote access VPN, what if that goes down? What if that becomes unavailable? Vulnerability scanning, what happens if we find this? There's certain things within an incident response plan that will relate and translate somewhat, but that's a good roadmap to at least outline what controls do we have and don't we have, and then where does our gap and thus response plan need to exist in, right? Because controls can exist, controls can be absent, controls can fail. There's a lot that's going on. So helpful roadmaps like that, it just help orient as you're working on a document like this. And it's a journey. It's not a destination. Don't think of it as a magic, majestic document that you're going to put 1,000 hours into and then it never needs to be touched again. That's not true, unfortunately. So I would say keep it bite-sized, keep it as easy and as compact as possible. So that way it makes updates a little bit more sustainable, less scary.
Well, thank you both for your insights. We'll let Mike get back to that amazing, beautiful no quarter booth and keep spreading awareness. In closing, effective incident response is essential for maintaining the security and integrity of your organization, even with prevention in place. A plan should always be prepared, like we stated previously. By implementing robust incident response plans, regularly training staff, and fostering a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement, organizations can better prepare for the mitigate and the impact of security incidents. So remember, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, and together we can work towards a safer digital future. So thank you for joining us on this episode of the Safety Brief, and we can't wait to see you next time.